Well, thanks for joining us today, everyone, for our September Voter-Friendly Campus webinar. We're going to be starting off talking about a recent poll that the Fair Election Center's Campus Vote Project had conducted by HIT Strategies. These findings are from a proprietary survey conducted by HIT Strategies on behalf of the Fair Election Center. The survey consisted of 1,000 college students nationally, and it was conducted online, and it was fielded from August 6th to August 11th. And the margin of error is plus or minus 3.1% total. So really excited to be able to share this information with you guys. We did a series of focus groups prior to this to try and kind of dig in and hear some more directly from college students about what they thought the barriers to voting was, what was keeping them and their peers from voting, and also what sort of things would help them access voting and overcome those perceived barriers and the messages that helped motivate them to vote. Here you can see the demographics of the poll respondents, the gender breakout, race breakout, party. We tried to match these things up a bit with the college student population generally. You can see largely Gen Z, 18 to 25 within this group. If you want to go to the next one, Chuck. And then we also wanted to make sure that we had kind of a range of views, even kind of within the student population. So you can see about 2/3 of the respondents, 3/4 were in four-year programs, and around 30% of them were in associate programs. Tried to have a good balance of folks kind of across their first, second, third, and fourth year of school. And then a good mix of institutional types. So predominantly public state institutions. And then again, a good percentage of them in community colleges, and then another percentage, about 20% in private colleges. And also primarily in-state students with still some sampling of kind of out-of-state students within that as well. So key findings from the polls, a couple of things, hopefully for many of you as practitioners and folks who are interested in this work and work with students, most of these shouldn't be shocking, but really helpful to see kind of this reflected in the data and the direct responses from students when we were doing this work. So a key thing for us is knowing, we know students are motivated to vote. We know that there are a lot of issues that they really care about and they're passionate about. But one of the disconnects there is knowing that voting is important, having a stated intent to vote, and then seeing, though, that there's this belief that their individual vote potentially is not going to have an impact or might not matter, and really struggling to kind of square those two things. Not surprisingly, one of the things is that students are kind of unhappy frequently with their choices or with current elected officials. But again, state that they want more interactions with their elected officials. They want to know more about what those folks are doing and what they want to do if they are elected. So more than half of candidate students in the survey saying they wanted to hear more from candidates that were going to be on the ballot. Another big barrier that we work to try and really help tackle, knowing that voting is very particular to where you are and we have different rules in every state, is really helping students, especially as the newest members of our democracy, get the information they need about the actual voting process to feel comfortable and ready and not miss any key deadlines. So, having that information about where to vote, when to vote, what types of IDs or documentation to bring, what are the key deadlines, something that was noted pretty frequently from students in the survey. And again, wanting to reduce those barriers as we started trying to ask them what would help folks overcome these barriers is different ways to get that information, but most notably trying to make voting more accessible by having ballot boxes or on-campus voting sites to make the actual process of voting more convenient. And then kind of in the last section today, we'll talk some about some of the messages that we use to try and help students, especially with this first key finding of understanding the power that they do have both individually and collectively as a community, understanding some of the key messages issues that they were focused on, as well as some of the messages that help reframe voting from being individualistic to collective, and something that could really actually impact the outcome of where things are going in the country. So most students think voting is relatively easy, but they're kind of divided on about why other students choose not to vote. So I think, a number of people, when we ask them kind of about their own perceptions of it, they think that it's pretty easy for them, but when they reflect on others, a pretty even split here on some people thinking that it's because it's so complicated, even if they're able to navigate the deadlines and the informational issues and the logistical issues, that is what derails many of their peers, and then slightly more folks actually saying that people choose not to participate because they don't like their choices or they don't think it'll have an impact. So an interesting piece kind of on that we wanted to follow up too, especially after 2020, when we saw this huge shift to by mail voting and even in-person voting during the pandemic, to see kind of what students were thinking they would do this year. And not surprisingly, kind of a reversion back to where the majority of students were telling us that they intended to show up in person on election day to cast their ballot. But still a pretty sizable share of folks who said they intended to vote, that they would vote by mail, and then a not insignificant portion of folks planning to vote in person, but doing it early ahead of election day. So knowing that those kind of are kind of students' views on kind of how easily accessible the process was and how they intended to vote, it was no surprise to us, like we said, to see that making the actual mechanics of voting more accessible was one of the top responses we got from students in the survey. Almost half of students picking that having ballot drop boxes or voting sites on campus would help overcome obstacles to voting. Again, especially for this audience, really want to highlight that having trusted sources like student affairs professionals from their institution offering voting information, doing it on the campus's website, having programming and orientation, or sending this out by email or text was the second most selected option for how folks think they could kind of get information and overcome barriers to access, was getting that logistical information they need from student affairs professionals. And then again, and you can see this one was split up a little bit more by institution types and some of the other responses, a little bit more variance there, but having professors avoiding big exams or assignments on election day, which obviously I think knowing that many students plan to vote on election day is a key portion of making sure they have access to that. Whereas, I think with some other students planning to vote by mail or early, that being less of a barrier for them. And again, the specific type of information that students were saying they need was kind of what to bring when they go to vote, since many folks haven't voted before. That was one of the top options we saw for folks kind of saying they don't know what to do. Obviously, most importantly, knowing where to go, and then knowing the dates and hours were kind of the top three there, but not far behind that. And especially really important to us and making sure that we're doing this as we start to come towards the close of voter registration deadlines in many states, is really making sure that the registration process and that those deadlines are widely known on campus and that students are getting registered to vote. If folks aren't registered to vote, then that's kind of the end of the conversation for them until the next election cycle. In most places, there's, only 10 states or so that have election day registration. So in the vast majority of states, if students aren't registered by the deadline, then they're not going to be able to participate in this election. So knowing kind of that's a lot of the logistics of it, about kind of this sort of even split of students thinking about what is keeping students from voting. Is it because of, these logistical barriers, and which specific barriers around information and access will it take? We did want to note that, obviously a large number of students were saying that despite the stated intent that they have themselves to vote and the importance they know that voting has, a lot of people believing that, one of the obstacles to college students voting is a belief that voting doesn't change anything, or a lack of interest in elections, or even just disliking the potential candidate options available to them at that. Kind of some of the top reasons, even above some of these logistical issues, for why they think college students aren't voting. So an important piece to us on this that we wanted to make sure we shared, knowing that sort of part of what some folks are saying is that they're kind of unhappy with elected officials, is sort of looking at this and seeing kind of the satisfied, dissatisfied ratings that folks gave to their current elected officials. And what you can see here is that there's a real inverse where, far more folks are focused kind of on national and federal elected officials and being dissatisfied with those positions. And then as you get closer down the ballot, more folks being kind of satisfied with their state government officials or even their local officials, and being less dissatisfied with them. A little bit also an increase in the indifference there, I think, as we come down and people are less familiar with those positions. So in trying to think about how students are holding these sentiments and also how to respond to those sentiments and trying to encourage folks to see the power that their vote can have, knowing that they might be thinking about just these national or federal elections when they say that they think their vote might not have an impact, is that a lot of folks are more satisfied with these other offices and interested in what they're doing, and potentially might not be thinking about the fact that a lot of these positions are also on their ballot, or if they're most dissatisfied with these other positions and they are on the ballot, that this is a really important time for them to be engaged and to vote in the midterm elections. And again, one of the things that folks would like to see or participate in this kind of upcoming season, we saw very high on that list, was events where local candidates would kind of connect with students and take questions and answer these things, kind of close some of this information gap that students have about who their local elected officials are and what they're running on and what they're interested in. But again, still a lot of other interest in the opportunity to kind of be able to get nonpartisan information, potentially in class, be able to ask questions about the voting process itself as well, coming up kind of just behind some of these other opportunities to engage with candidates and learn more about them. We still saw a real need and interest kind of across these top 4 categories, either learning more about the candidates or learning more about the process, both of them being pretty highly responsive for the things that students wanted to know more about to be able to be prepared to participate in elections coming up. So we fielded this survey, like we mentioned, in early August, and we just wanted to highlight for folks some of the top issues that we heard back from students that they were most focused on. So I will say this was prior to the administration's announcement about student loan forgiveness and what the details of that might look like. So I think we might see a slightly different reordering on the issues if we were to redo this now. But, not surprisingly, given a drastic increase in inflation for a population like students, I was very high on there. Reproductive health and access to that, and gun violence prevention by far and away, at least in August, the top 3 issues that we got responses for of what students were most interested in hearing about. So if you're thinking about having nonpartisan voter educational programming or reaching out to candidates or trying to get them to respond to candidate guides, these might be some of the issues the students are most hearing those positions on from those candidates if they're coming to campus or you're trying to put together nonpartisan materials. And then wanted to share some of the messages that we then tried to test out to see what was most motivating to students to help kind of close that gap that we talked about in that very first key finding, where we talked about the fact that students say they intend to vote, they understand the importance of voting, but a large number of them, as we saw in the survey responses, almost up to 40%, think that voting doesn't have an impact. So really trying to help make sure that they don't encounter one of these other barriers and get put off the trail because they miss a deadline or they don't have the right type of document, that they actually do make a plan and they follow through with that plan to be able to register and vote this year, knowing that they are interested in a lot of issues, they're passionate about a lot of issues, and they want to be heard and participate. Some of the best messages we tested out kind of reframe voting from being one time and individualistic to being more of a collective impact, and also really stating and showing them specific context where the youth vote collectively did have a major impact or could have an impact going forward. So you can see, if you want to go back one, some of the messages we tried out were millennials and Gen Z are the most diverse generation in US history. Now that we collectively make up the largest eligible voting population, we have the power to make the rest of the country respond to the needs of Black, Brown, Indigenous, immigrant, and other marginalized communities. Our communities have gone long enough without seeing ourselves reflected in our elected officials and in their decisions. It's time we take our power back and put people in office who represent us. And then also this other message we called the future. The decisions elected officials make today will impact our generation the most. So why are we okay with the fact that older generations who turn out in greater numbers have a greater say than we do in who is elected? It's time for us to take charge of our future and hold elected officials accountable who have been making choices only in their own best interests. If you want to go to the next one. Two of these other ones, especially, really drilling in and showing folks specific context where there was an impact, we had a pretty high response from these messages as well in the poll, and increasing folks' likelihood to say that they intended to vote this year. So the one on young voters is young voters have the power to make real change on important issues like police accountability and criminal justice. We've already seen it in action. In 2018, young voters in Chicago were fed up with unchecked police brutality and came together to elect candidates who created a police oversight board to hold police accountable. We want to see that happen again. Use your vote this election to demand action, because being part of the 30% of the electorate means that we hold the greatest power to hold elected officials accountable. And then also, especially looking back just to 2020, where we saw historic turnout across the board, but especially with young people, even in a year where more people were voting overall, and we saw the most people in the history of the country actually vote, we saw young people and student voters overperform even within that, and voted even higher increases than other age populations did. So, here you go back. Our vote as young people has the power to change the outcome of this election. One proof: in 2020, there was an 11 percentage point increase in turnout among young voters. The results: the youngest and most diverse Congress in US history. This November, let's turn out in record numbers again to make sure that our elected leaders represent us and will put our values into action in DC and in our communities. So the last part of this that we wanted to share was also just sort of knowing where students are going to get information about elections. So not surprisingly, by far, the number one response we got was from social media posts, but not far behind that was especially parents and family, and broadcast news, and then slightly further down beyond just social media posts, actual social media influencers. But, kind of in the middle here, we did want to lift up, a very big place that folks said they got their information was from either talking to their classmates or their friends, which is something we've heard a lot and seen a lot in the work that we do with campuses and campus communities in particular. And even a number of students still saying they get this kind of information from professors and faculty already. And did want to share, I think for us, this is where folks are saying they're already getting this information. So if you're trying to communicate the type of either motivational messages or logistical information that students say they need to be able to successfully vote this year, is thinking about this is where they're already going for it. But also, if you are in one of these other groups or one of these other buckets, is there a way to make to bring this number up by having more faculty on campus be interested in sharing this information? Knowing from some of our prior slides that students said getting information would from their faculty or from their campus administration would be very helpful, and that those are trusted sources of information, that we can drive these numbers up here in particular by actually meeting the needs of students, saying that they want to hear from those trusted sources to get that kind of information. So that was a lot of content right there. Why don't we take a quick pause and see if there's any questions on any of the content we went through already from the hit poll before we move on. All right, well, feel free to add any comments or questions or thoughts about all that in the chat if you'd like. And we're gonna just kind of do a quick refresher. I know last month we did a real deep dive and talked about all of the civic holidays, but we can definitely, I just wanted to take a little bit of time to follow up here and talk about some of the other upcoming holidays, and we'll see, hopefully, possibly, if our other presenter is able to join us, we'll circle back around and talk about poll workers before we wrap up for today. But, I hope everyone had a tremendous National Voter Registration Day last week on Tuesday, September 20th. Really excited about this, about that going on. We know we're coming up a number of kind of some of the earlier voter registration deadlines for states that have deadlines 30 days out. Will be coming up on kind of October 11th in most states, given that there's a federal holiday on the 10th. So we're about 2 weeks out from the voter registration deadline, kind of in the first batch of states that'll start to have those deadlines come up. So hopefully you've had a really successful National Voter Registration Day. But wanted to make sure that folks are thinking ahead. The fall semester and the election calendar both move very quickly. We're only 45 days out from Election Day. So coming up next week will be National Voter Education Week. And National Voter Education Week is primarily, a lot more of this content will be online than for National Voter Registration Day and the amount of folks who are out doing voter registration. But if you follow along, us here at Campus Vote Project, along with a lot of our partners, we will be sharing out content all week. There's a different theme for every day of the week to kind of help people understand the different kind of hashtag vote ready processes of what you need to do. So on Monday, it will be talking about, checking your registration status and making sure that that's updated. On Tuesday, there'll be a lot of content talking about how to vote by mail if that's available to you in your state. Wednesday, we'll be talking about making a plan to vote for folks who are planning to vote in person. Thursday, we'll be talking about getting some more information about what's on the ballot and kind of nonpartisan ways to find that information out for folks in this space. And then Friday will be a fun day, and we'll be talking about really taking voter engagement to the next level. So really looking forward to all of next week and all of the National Voter Education Week content that will be going on. So you can follow along on social media with the hashtag vote ready across all 5 days. And then after that, we'll start kind of finally moving into some of the actual voting holidays. So coming up on Friday, October 28th is Vote Early Day. Vote Early Day, one of the things we know, especially even from the pandemic, is that, and we saw it in the poll responses too, that we got students primarily think about voting on Election Day and have the intent to vote on Election Day, but Election Day is one day. And if something goes wrong, if they can't find their ID, if they get caught in class, if they have to work an extra shift, if they need to do childcare, all sorts of things can come up and prevent folks from being able to actually vote if they wait until Election Day. And Election Day is the last opportunity to vote. So one of the things that we're hoping to be able to communicate to folks across National Voter Education Week and during the Vote Early Day programming, if you're able to do some of this as well, is that there are lots of other opportunities to vote and participate in the election, and people should be thinking about and trying to take advantage of those so that hopefully no unforeseen issues or circumstances arise that could prevent them from voting on Election Day, which is the last opportunity to vote. So, just a final recap here, registration, education, turnout, and then, Election Hero Day is the day right before Election Day. And it's designed to just try and kind of help raise awareness and celebrate the folks who help make elections possible, especially in such a polarized time. The prevalence of the big lie around the 2020 election and just a slew of what has been a mounting effort at trying to make people think that our elections are not secure in this country for a number of years that has really hit a fevered pitch recently. Making sure that those nonpartisan election officials who are responsible for running elections every day in and out, who are members of our community, and all the poll workers who give up their time to run early voting sites and Election Day sites, that we're taking a little bit of time to celebrate and encourage them ahead of what will be a very busy day for them on Tuesday, November 8th, and probably for all of us as well. So, and you can use kind of the same hashtag vote ready across all 4 of these days. So we'll have a lot of great content kind of coming up across the rest of the holidays for all of these going forward. But wanted to just quickly recap and remind folks that we've got 3 more holidays coming up, even though we're past National Voter Registration Day.
Is this my cue?
Oh, good. I was sorry. I was just pulling up the list to see if you had joined us. Thanks, Ryan. Sorry about that.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I got accidentally double booked, but glad to speak to you all. So I work with Fair Election Center on managing the Work Elections project with that's based at our organization. And then I also work with Power the Polls, which is kind of a expanded version of that project that includes like a couple hundred partner groups. And it's a first of its kind initiative that was launched in 2020 to help meet the needs of election administrators during the pandemic, and now, continuing forward with a focus on bringing in young people and people who have high skills that are in high demand, such as multilingual or tech savvy folks, to help meet the needs of the current electorate. Next slide. So in 2020, we had a handful of founding partners that have really played a lead role in the organization, and those include nonprofits as well as corporations and media companies that have really helped us magnify or greatly expand our reach and meet the goals that we had set out. So what started as kind of something Fair Election Center was doing has now become a really big collaborative process. So just to go back to the summer of 2020 for a brief second, that's where the need for this project became very clear. Work Elections was already launched, and Fair Election Center was kind of the main group doing something on this issue prior to the pandemic. And then once that started, it became clear to a lot of other folks that this was a critical issue to get sorted prior to the November election. There were, primaries in the spring that were like a total mess, where poll workers weren't able or willing to show up, and that led to just closures of polling locations or really long lines. And so we realized, we need to help meet these needs to prevent to prevent this from happening in November. So our initial goal was 250,000 poll workers. That was what we set in June of the summer. And just due to the massive reach of the partnership and the response of the public, we got over 700,000 people to sign up, including we had over 11,000 people who were recruited just by Campus Vote Project, working on college campuses in the fall of 2020. And the partnership grew to over 400 partners. And as a result, in November of 2020, there were no polling location closures due to staff shortages, which is what we experienced so much in the spring primaries. And the folks that we had recruited are also people that help process all those tens of millions of mail-in ballots, that all that counting that had to be done the week or 10 days after election day. Those were people that were recruited through this. But the need does still exist. Luckily the situation isn't quite as dire as it was in 2020, but there are jurisdictions in pretty much every state that CVP is located in that need help still. And so we're working to really highlight those needs and make sure that this election goes just as smoothly as last time. So why do poll workers matter? Well, I've already kind of mentioned the big reasons. They prevent long lines and prevent polling locations from being consolidated and closed. And that is hugely important to ensure that people are able to exercise their right to vote easily. If polling locations close, that means people have to figure out, okay, well, I normally go here to vote, but now I have to travel to a different part of town to cast my ballot. Might not be as accessible to me, or I don't have time to wait in 5-hour long lines. So making sure we have enough staff, can limit the length of lines, can make sure that people have reasonable access to polling locations, or are able to go to their normal places that they vote. And then, when voters get to the polling location, you're really the face of democracy to them. You're the one handing them their ballot, explaining the process, and then answering any questions they have, and making sure that they feel comfortable that their vote is being counted. And it's also a really great way to help make sure that everyone gets to vote, regardless of what language they speak or any other any other particular needs that they have. And that's why we're really trying to diversify the pool of poll workers that serve across the country. Depending on what state you're in, you might call poll workers election judges. Some states call them clerks or officers, but they're all basically the same thing. And they're the people who make sure that the election runs smoothly at that local precinct level. And so they do a lot of the tasks that I just mentioned: handing out ballots, giving out the I voted stickers, answering questions, and keeping lines moving smoothly. So I listed a few other things out here. One thing to point out is a lot of states states that now have same-day voter registration, poll workers can also play a role in that, registering them and then helping them vote, and providing assistance to people with specific needs. You also help break down polling locations at the end of the day. So each state has a different set of requirements for who's eligible to serve. That comes down to where you're registered to vote, where you live, and how old you are. There are also some jurisdictions that require equal representation of political parties. So under state law, they have to have, at least one member of, they have to have at least one registered Democrat and one registered Republican at each polling location. So that can kind of come into, that could be a challenge for some jurisdictions if, the partisan makeup of their population is kind of skewed one way or another. So how do you become a poll worker? The first step is to go to powerthepolls.org/campus. That's Campus Vote Project's unique link. And you put in your name and contact info and your zip code, and the website will automatically direct you to a page with information on your particular jurisdiction's application, and it includes stuff like how much poll workers are paid where you live, what the training requirements are, what the hours are, what languages are in demand if you speak other languages. And so it's really, we've done a lot of research on the Fair Elections Center team to collect all this data and make sure it's up to date. And so it's very cool that we're able to provide that targeted info for folks. Once you've signed up and applied through your local election administrator, you want to be persistent but also patient, because as you can imagine, local election officials are often like clerks with multiple other responsibilities. Like elections are just one of the things that they do, and this time of year most of them are insanely busy. So just monitoring your inbox, making sure you're after a couple of weeks maybe reaching out to election officials, although at this point if you're applying, maybe give it just a week, because we are kind of coming towards the end of recruitment. Then you'll have to go to a training before you can work. And those are run by the local election officials. And lastly, once you get your assignment, you have to make sure to show up on election day to meet the commitment that you agreed to, and make sure that the people in your community can vote in an easy, straightforward manner. As I mentioned before, most of the questions related to poll working come down to where you live. And so using Power the Polls is a great one-stop resource to get answers to all of these. Once you put in your location, you'll have this provided to you. The Power of the Polls team has been communicating with election administrators across the country to identify where needs are in the run-up to the midterm elections. And as of today, this is a list of the jurisdictions in the states where CVP is active that are still in high need of poll worker applications. So I've also included the language needs for those jurisdictions. Obviously, if you don't have, if English is your only language, that's totally fine. It's just these are also additional needs that they need people who are fluent in English and the languages listed to apply to be able to serve their communities. I should point out in a couple states, even if you don't live in the jurisdiction listed, you can still apply to serve. So in Georgia, if you live in a neighboring county to any of the counties listed, for example, if you're in Fulton County, you can serve in a bordering county as long as your home county is not in high demand. You just have to, I think, get permission from your home county and you can serve elsewhere in the area. In Michigan, you can serve regardless of town residents, as long as you're registered to vote in the state. So if you're in the Detroit area and are registered to vote in a town near there, Detroit is always in need of poll workers, so that would be available to you. And then in Wisconsin, you can serve in these cities if you're a resident, a registered voter of the county in which these cities are located. The other states, you have to be registered to vote in the county that's listed to serve. But yeah, so put this together to highlight those needs. So there's multiple ways you can get involved. Obviously, signing up yourself is a huge help. Then sharing it with your communities and with people in the CVP family. Our big success last go around was the huge network we were able to develop, and the really getting people who hadn't served historically involved for the first time. As I mentioned, we had 11,000 college students, and so we're really trying to continue outreach to those areas and get more young people involved so that they hopefully stay involved as lifelong poll workers every 2 years. And the link is right here on this next slide. You want to use the /campus link. That's Campus Vote Project's unique URL. If you have any questions, you can email me at ryan@fairelectioncenter.org. But I'm happy to answer any questions now as well.
Awesome. Well, I know this is a very busy time of year for everybody with the fall semester in full swing now. And like we mentioned, the midterm elections also going full steam ahead. So we hope that, yeah, we'll share out the content as Cola mentioned here. We'll have an email out to folks before the end of the week that'll have the slides and some of the key links we shared today to assist folks with this. But as Ryan mentioned, still a need and time for folks to sign up and get trained to serve as poll workers either during early voting or on election day. And we hope everyone will be back to join us across the #VoteReady efforts next week for National Voter Education Week, and as we look forwards towards Vote Early Day and Election Day coming up, all just in the next 6 weeks. So good luck out there, and feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions or need any help. Thanks, everyone.